And greetings, everyone. This is the seventh session of the Elixir Festival. I'm Miles, coming to you from Bali. I have the wonderful pleasure of introducing Sarah Janes to you all, who is a dream muse, dream guide, dream researcher, and reviver of the sacred Greek initiations. And I've just been absolutely delighted to devour her work. And today is an opportunity finally for us to engage in a dialogue about healing and about dream work in both the Greek and Indic or Tibetan traditions. And also, if we could touch on, if we get there, on the theurgy connection with deity yoga, which of course is a whole other subject. So we'll see if we get there. But I want to just thank everybody who's been on the Elixir journey with us and enjoyed all the presentations by all these great scholars. You know, we started with the alchemist Day here in Bali during the book launch. We went into the mythology and meaning with Phil Cousineau, who's an extraordinary wordsmith and author of some 30 books. We had the delight and pleasure to sit with astrologer Lynn Bell, and that was followed by Tibetologist Professor Robert Thurman. And then we had mystic Andrew Harvey. And last week we did a journey in that actually is very relevant as a backdrop to today's discussion with Ian Baker, explorer and Tibetan scholar Ian Baker, who brought us into the Swat Valley in Pakistan, where there may have been a very interesting intersection between the Greek and Hellenistic traditions, possibly even the Egyptian mysteries, in dialogue with the early tantras of India and Tibet. So that was a fascinating discussion, which lays the groundwork for some of our discussion today with Sarah Janes. Now, I have to say, Sarah, I have, there's a little interesting about your background because you've avoided, to my great delight, being a scholar in an institution, but you have the rigor and the chops to sit with any of those scholars. But you're not fussy. You have this great energy about you, and you're not, your mind feels very dexterous and conversant, and yet you have a lot of intuition and a lot of play and a lot of delight that I often don't see in the hardcore academics who are trying to really push a point or defend a position. And so, I find there's a tremendous depth, but there's also this just wonderful wellspring of creativity in you that I just really admire. And so I'm so delighted to finally have this conversation with you. And I want to just take 2 minutes of your time to set a context or a backdrop of why I'm so fascinated, if you would indulge me for a couple of minutes. Because in the beginning of my writing my book, Elixir, there was a period in probably around 2018 where I really started having like daytime visions, not as much dreams. I haven't been much of a dreamer, recollecting my dreams per se, but for some reason in the lead up to the pandemic, there was more of a visionary experience. Daytime dreams and or daytime visions, symbols, synchronicities, intuitions really were hitting me much harder. And all of a sudden, I had one of Asclepius. And, my background in Tibetan Buddhism, he was not at all familiar to me. And he just kept coming, his staff with the intertwined serpent, and it just a sort of a noble masculinity about him. And I started Googling him and going through the internet portals, and lo and behold, I loved the mythology of Asclepius, and something in my psyche was tantalized and activated. And I think it was through Asclepius that I then came upon the Asclepion, the notion of an Asclepion, and started reading more about that. And this was at a time where my long career of being a psychotherapist in Manhattan confined, if you will, to a cinder block civilization on the third or fifth floor of a building, and trying to do neck up psychotherapy through conversations. And this was juxtaposed with what I was reading about the healing that took place at the Asclepion and all the modalities, the rich interplay of space, hot and cold spa, ritual, sound, meditation, prayer, calisthenics, theater, dance, and dream work, all of it just felt so potent, including pilgrimage. Just even getting to an
Yeah.
Asclepion seemed like part of the entire healing process, that it really, for me, suggested to my mind that I was at the tail end of doing my therapy in a certain way, and I really had to let it go and go on a journey. And now, things have shifted so dramatically. But before I go into that, I want to just turn that over to you in a sort of big context question. What do you think is happening in the collective psyche? How do you interpret my story in terms of all of a sudden and out of the blue, a flash of Asclepius and the drawing of this idea of an Asclepion, a holistic health center? What does it mean? How does it speak to you? What kind of impressions do you have for me personally and for us as a society in the collective unconscious? What does it suggest to you?
I think what's happening generally collectively is a quickening, like a quickening of making connections and understanding. And there's been this like long history and tradition of models of the universe, models of reality being based upon the dominant um, material culture of the time. So you look at creation myths in Egypt or Mesopotamia, and they are often things like people being crafted out of clay. And now we have access to so much information, and we're able to process so much information at such a rapid speed that collectively we're kind of speeding up and quickening, and we have instant access to these ideas or insights that come to us. So it just speeds up the process. I think one of the things I really love about running dream retreats here is the amount of people that say, I had this dream about Asclepius, or I had this dream about Pegasus. And I get all sorts of people, like lawyers, genetic scientists, like people that are very scientific. And this is why I absolutely love working with dreams, because I like, I wouldn't say necessarily scientific, peer-reviewed, tested, lab study type of science, but I like being rigorous and thorough, and not, and also I might be accused of not letting the truth get in the way of a good story sometimes in my personal anecdotal types of storytelling. But I think it's important to like see the big picture and to be honest and truthful about what realities there are, really are present, what is happening. But the dream allows for like a lot of flexibility, a lot of creativity, a lot of the imaginal, without losing your credibility or scientific rigor or being taken seriously by academics, because the dream, everyone can accept that dreaming is imaginal, dreaming is creative. And so there's a lot of flexibility with the sorts of research that I do, because you can have dreams that you have interactions with gods and goddesses, and you can perceive or interpret that any way you want. But if it's healing and if it feels good, then who cares? Ultimately, I think the important thing is direct experience. And I think lots of people are coming to the retreats because they are desperate for that direct experience. And I think I love what you said there about head up psychology or science or anything, because there has been this sort of ridiculous reductionist approach towards medicine, health, especially anything regarding mental health, as being purely brain related. Like even psychedelic studies, they're looking at brain scans, but actually your experience of the world, your entire nervous system is plugged into the natural world all the time. So how anyone can expect to thrive when they're in an unhealthy environment is peculiar. And I think people are often born into kind of cacophonous, polluted, stressful environments, and so they never know anything else. But so, for example, we were just talking before we went online about come to Epidavros, and it is quiet, peaceful. All you can hear is bird song. There's no roads near me. You can hear the sound of the sea at night. Like that in and of itself relaxes your nervous system. Everything, you have neurons in your heart, you have serotonin receptors in your gut. Your whole body is like an integrated receptor of your outside environment. And I think this is something that the ancient Greeks understood very well, that you can't just look at the symptom, you have to look at the whole being and the soul of someone. Just conceiving that any human being has a soul is a good start, because modern medicine doesn't really accept that human beings have souls. But recognizing that there are spiritual, non-physical aspects to a human being, I think is an important part of approaching holistic healing. And so many people contact me saying that they've had dreams where Asclepius appears to them. And it is part of the literature of these ancient sanctuaries, actually, that Asclepius visits people in their dreams before they come to say, you've got to come to my sanctuary. So I love that, because it's this echo from the ancient past, that Asclepius is still there somehow in the kind of egregorial consciousness and still communicating to people. And it makes so much sense, doesn't it? So much sense that in order to heal fully and thoroughly, you go somewhere where every aspect of your life is examined and dealt with and personally attended to, because you'd go to an Asclepion and someone would ask you to tell them about your life, for, you know, your childhood, your food, every single aspect of your life. And now I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but in the UK, I think if you go to a doctor's surgery now, you've got 25 minutes and you can't have more than 2 problems at any one session. So there's this huge lack of like genuine care and genuine consideration for your experience, the whole person.
Yeah, I mean, before we get into what might have taken place at the Asclepion, yeah, it's these broader, I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that the paradigm is shifting. You're calling it a quickening, and maybe that's got to do with the fact that we're at the tail end of the Piscean age and emerging into a new age. And, that doesn't happen overnight, but just like a sea change, there is currents drawing us out or even shattering us awake, really unpleasantly, rudely awakening us to the fact that the current paradigm has reached its zenith or reached its tail end. It
You
does,
can't survive. You can't survive anymore unless you make a dramatic change. Like I'm living in Greece now, part-time. I was thinking about this a bit today, because there's a lot of talk I notice in spiritual new agey circles, this like waking up to the matrix 5D reality, all this kind of stuff. And people talking about, if you're not surrendered, if you're not like completely open, all your chakras aren't opened, then you're gonna come a cropper, basically, because you've got too much resistance, and this wave of new energy, these new downloads are gonna destroy you. I'm quite obsessed with cults, actually. They're like my pet interest. But there is something about the conditions that are now present in most big Western cities make life impossible to exist unless you've completely accepted that you want to be really wealthy and really rich, and that's all you care about, and all you're going to do is make loads of money, or you're wealthy because of your family. Ordinary people who aren't that bothered about money, who are happy to have a fairly reasonable quality of life, but they enjoy the simple things, they're forced out. Like where I was living in England, my rent went up from something like £450 a month to £1,000 a month, which made it untenable, and it's like not even a very nice place to live. So I came here, and my landlord has rented this bungalow to me for €300 a month. And for me, that was like, well, this is actually the easier way of living. So I can just completely let that go, because I don't care. I left my flat full of all of the stuff and walked out with a bag, like a tote bag of belongings that I wanted to take to Greece. I'm not attached to any of that stuff. So I found it easy to let go. But the world is getting so difficult to live in those Western centers of so-called civilization, because there's so much greed and so much squeezing out of individuals, and also the people that are the least wealthy are getting squeezed the hardest, that they can't do it anymore. And I think one of the options is to just opt out and go somewhere else where the values of a simple life and simple pleasures are still upheld and appreciated, and become part of that sort of fluid motion in the world of going where things are still good. Because the only way that these people can get away with it is some people are prepared to accept it. And if you're prepared to accept it, then they can perpetuate charging higher and higher prices until when do you stop? When does anyone say no?
Yeah. I think that very much aligns with how I felt leaving New York City. There's just the sheer veracity with which living required you to just go morning to night and get sucked into the kind of energetic pull. But I do have to say, even moving to Bali, though, economically was much more, it opened so much up. Their time is more valuable than money. But what we're talking about here also includes this subtle shift that doesn't have to do, it has less to do with location and more to do with the reductionistic paradigm. The perspective, and that's no longer Western. That seems to be imported. And the problems that I see in Bali is that it's a very, very ancient culture with its own shamanic traditions, but the intersection or the conflict it's having with consumerism, yes, is very pronounced, but underlying consumerism is the dogmatic, rigid, reductionistic paradigm that there's one life to live. You've got to
Mm.
gobble it up. You've got to be greedy. And it also has very, very closed parameters, which is why you and I, maybe why you don't resonate with being a scholar. It is too confining. But also the scientific paradigm that doesn't explain everything very well to our satisfaction or reduces people when they're at the doctors to just bits of matter like on an assembly line and doesn't see the whole
Mm.
person. The opening question about what's happening in the zeitgeist that would prompt someone like you to revive the tradition of this Asclepion and to be a dream guide to help people on inner journeys and outer journeys, which I really resonate because all those things I just mentioned have really took me into my journey too. Part of it is that the old paradigm doesn't fit anymore, doesn't work, really doesn't work
Yeah,
financially,
it
but it
doesn't.
doesn't work health-wise. It doesn't work
You're
in
right.
any
Yeah,
way.
it doesn't make sense. There's peer-reviewed papers, but then there's good sense. And you, like we were talking about, my friend who has this idea to bring people to Epidavros and see if they respond better to psychotherapeutic treatment here than they would, in their ordinary lives. Um, here's a place where you can actually do these kinds of studies in real time with real people in a real place where everything is set up perfectly, where you have got like a perfect healing environment that is natural, that is unspoiled, that is really, really relaxing, that's easy to work in as well, actually, because I do find it very easy to work in Greece. And so it just makes sense. And um, trying to get any kind of studies done or trying to do similar kinds of things in England, you've got like howling traffic outside, or you've got extortionate rents to pay, or you're not growing the herbs in your garden, you're having to buy them. So like all of these things, you can do them organically and holistically and all in the same place here. And so it just makes lots of sense. I'm quite a practical person. And I think that uh, science itself obviously isn't at fault, but the way that scientific institutions or educational institutions make things complicated, make people jump through hoops, do not have the right kinds of facilities to do, because sleep lab studies, for example, are something I'm interested in, but a sleep lab, generally speaking, is a place with a lot of electronics where most people can't get a decent night's sleep. Most people won't feel relaxed, and it's not going to work. So bring people to an Asclepion where they can sleep in amongst nature, amongst trees and plants, and also it isn't important to me to have results analyzed, really. Like I can see for
Yeah.
myself, and because it's
Yeah.
creative, because it's imaginal, and because it's a retreat, and because it's fun, it's not too serious, but people can see real results, and that's what
Yeah.
matters to people more than anything else. Because you can read scientific papers till the cows come home, but they're boring and they make you go to sleep, which is quite useful sometimes if you do want to go to sleep quickly.
Sarah, let me ask you before we I'd like you to take us on an adventure into an Asclepion and imagine or detail for us what that journey might have been like, what it might have included, what the texts or the steles have to suggest about what people reported. Let's take an adventure there. But before we go there, just as I started I shared a little bit about my first encounter Can you share your first encounter with Asclepius or the Asclepian tradition and what that was like for you? When that happened, in what context, what it was like?
Can't remember the first time I ever dreamt about Asclepius, but it was a long time ago before I thought I knew about Asclepius, but I might have known about Asclepius. And he presented in that instance as quite a modern looking doctor, but he was white and glowing. I had lots of dreams with lots of different deities because I've always been really interested in ancient cultures. And one of the most impactful was actually with Ahura Mazda from Zoroastrianism, who came to me as a being of light from heaven, and I was in my childhood home standing on a landing, and he descended into my body. And you know how in lucid dreams you can see close up and far away at the same time, so I could see his shining body entering, just kind of like merging with mine. And then I could also see microscopically, or like beyond microscopically close up, I could see my DNA spirals, and they were unspiraling, so they became ladders. And then he stepped down those ladders, and as he touched each rung, it lit up, and I felt my whole body like radiant with health and light. And then the first one with Asclepius, he was like the man from Del Monte. Do you remember those old adverts about pineapples, pineapple juice? And he gave me very practical medical advice. He just said that I had to fast for 3 days, and I knew in the dream that sounds like good advice, so I just did it, and that was it. And then Asclepius has appeared to me in quite mundane dreams, generally speaking. Like, I think the reason why Asclepius sort of becomes the blueprint for Jesus in many ways is that he's this like humble, modest God who performs miracles, and he's very kindly and generous. And you can see why so many people of the time would have converted to Christianity, because he looks like Asclepius. He does a lot of the same stuff as Asclepius, and Asclepius is probably the most humble, modest, decent god in the Greek pantheon, who hasn't got, doesn't do jealous rages or retribution or fire and brimstone. He's quite nice and kind. So a lot of my dreams have been like Asclepius sort of in the background. And then I've had a lot of like snake dreams as well. And one of them, because I was really, I do a lot of work now with dreams where if I'm researching something, I will set an intention of I want to dream about this particular thing. And then I'll have a dream. And often I do them as afternoon naps, like dream incubation sessions, where, for example, I was writing an article recently about encumesis. And I was like, okay, I want to dream that I'm having the experience of encumesis in the ancient sanctuary of Asclepius at Epidavros. And it was amazing. Like, I was really there. But I had this one dream. I had a lot of dreams where, snakes are quite scary. And especially for ancient people, where snake bites were like a very plausible and regular cause of death and injury. Ancient people were kind of very hardwired to be fearful of snakes. So one of the intuitions I have about why snakes were so important in the cult of Asclepius is that they would wake you up in a dream in terms of they would make you become lucid. When you saw a snake in a dream, you'd be like, oh, there's a snake, and it would alert
Jolted
your
awake.
consciousness. Exactly. No, maybe it would wake you up completely, but
or jolt you into lucidity.
Exactly, yeah, because often lucidity starts in nightmares because you're scared of something and you remind yourself that you're dreaming. So in one of the dreams I had with a serpent, this snake was at the bottom of the stairs, and it was screaming at me for me to pay attention to it, and it was terrifying, and I didn't want to go close to it. But when I woke up, I realized that maybe if I'd allowed myself to have been bitten by this snake, that maybe how there's this concept of in a lot of ancient traditions, there's this concept of the dream realm being like a mirror realm where you get opposite effects for things. And I think that the snake venom may have acted as a kind of anti-venom, or like as a medicine, because something that happens when you eat or drink in dreams is because you anticipate there's going to be a change from eating or drinking something, especially if it's an intoxifying substance or a very potent substance. They can act as agents of transformation. This is why I think Lewis Carroll was obviously, I think he was an avid lucid dreamer, because Alice in Wonderland is like the perfect description of a lucid dream. And she's always eating and drinking stuff, and when she does, it changes her consciousness, because I think you have this expectation, anticipation, and your body has a sort of biochemical response to this imaginal substance. I've had experiences before where I've drank alcohol in dreams and I get drunk, or I one time was delivered a brick of psychedelic meat by a postman, and I ate the whole thing, and I've never taken psychedelics. And then I had this kind of like joke cartoon trip of what I imagine a psychedelic trip would have been like if I'd eaten a psychedelic brick of meat. So lots of serpent dreams. And I think the main thing for me is I wrote a book about the history and culture of sleeping and dreaming and dream magic. And I use dreaming a lot myself. And I've been lucid dreaming since I was a kid. It's always been my main thing. And I enjoyed writing the book, but I was also very aware of it's not healthy to sit and write a book for months on end. So the next bit of work I wanted to do was one that was physical, that involved walking around and seeing stuff. And I was like, well, I've written about all these places. I need to go to these places and I want to sleep there. And so one way I could make that happen is by running retreats here, because I know a lot about dreaming. I've done a lot of dream workshops. So I came for a recce, instantly fell in love with it. Instantly, someone was like, if you like it so much, here's a bungalow for 300 euros. And every single thing I wanted to do was just like, here you go, here you go, here you go, here, in a way that I've never experienced before in my life. It was like absolute, like dominoes lined up, like everything just opening up, like perfectly as well. You know, I had the realization the other day that when I moved into this little bungalow, and it's a very small little simple bungalow, but living in England, rent's getting really, really high. I've actually never in my entire life lived anywhere that I wanted to live. I've always just lived somewhere where I can just about afford that. Oh, that's just about within my budget. And when I moved into this place, I was like, it's in an orange grove. It's a little peach colored bungalow. It's got a veranda. I've got a garden. I'm next to the sea. I can swim over a sunken city. There's an ancient acropolis at the end of my road. There's an ancient theatre at the end of my road. Like, this is
Sarah, we're all going to want to join you there very, very soon.
People do, like some of the people come on my treats, about 5 of them now have got regular places that they come to because they just fall, like everyone just falls in love with it. It's so nice. And it's so easy and friendly and
it is actually situated
enriching
on the entry point to the Asclepion, right?
I mean, so okay. It's the beginning of the Sacred Way. So the Sacred Way runs about 10 kilometers from here to the sanctuary, which is just down the road. Yeah.
So take us on a journey into an Asclepion.
Well,
and imagine that it's ancient times. How did we get there?
Well, first of all, you have a dream.
Money? Would you have a guide take you there? What would you encounter? What would it have been like? Give us an insider perspective on what it would be like to make a journey and encounter the healing modalities of the Asclepion.
Well, one thing that we need to bear in mind actually is that nearly every sizable town or city would have had an Asclepion because they were the places to go for healing in ancient times. So there are probably way more than this, but they've been discovered at least 450 Asclepia all over the ancient Hellenic world. And that stretches into Turkey and North Africa, and even the UK adopted, when the Romans came over, there's even a British Romano sleep temple in Gloucestershire. And like you've just experienced, Asclepius could come to you in a dream sometime before and say, you need to make the pilgrimage, you need to come and make an offering or come and sleep in the Asclepia. And then you would travel. And Epidavros is a special one because Epidavros is often considered to be the birthplace of Asclepius. So, you know, this would be a really important sanctuary to come to. It's huge. There's a 14,000 seater theatre there. Because theatre was an important healing modality, like sacred theatre, the arts of Dionysus were considered to be promote catharsis. So when you watch theatre, when you're emotionally and spiritually moved, you purge negative emotions, you balance the humour. So theatre was a really important part of the process. But so Asclepius might come to you. In order to prepare yourself, you have to be ritually pure. So you might go through a period of like not eating meat, not drinking alcohol, abstaining from sex for a period of time. And pilgrims, there's an initiatory quality to it in some ways. It's a bit like being initiated into
how
a
would people
perfected
know,
version of the self.
even at that stage, if you're in the city or you're a city dweller, how would you know what prescriptions to follow? Would there be a local guide that would have helped you with it and then brought you to the Asclepion?
I think people knew where the Asclepia were located, and you have like different categories of people working at the Asclepia. You have the iatromantist, the physician seer who can interpret dreams. You have herbalists, you have all sorts of people working at the therapeutai. people that are performing actual operations, because that's one of the things that often gets left out of the conversation of the Asclepia, is they were performing actual operations, perfecting surgical arts there. And
Yeah.
they were using anesthetics, like they were using a combination of opium through fumigation, and then often poppy tea, and then also macerating mandrake root in wine and steeping that and using that to put people under. So the location of the Asclepia was known. Pilgrim routes to the Asclepia were known. And there's it's not too strict in terms of your period of fasting, but it's a bit like the mysteries, of Elefsis. It's known that you have to abstain from meat, you have to abstain from sex for a certain period of time. And then the main sense that you get when you enter the Asclepia these days, because it is a beautiful site, actually, the one down the road, because there's still a lot of nature there. There's mountains all around. It's in this kind of like bowl surrounded by mountains. And the whole sanctuary evolved from a much earlier Neolithic shrine on Mount Kynortion, which is just above the ancient theatre today. And that shrine was actually dedicated to a Mycenaean goddess of healing. And it looks very similar to what are called the Minoan Peak sanctuaries. So these are usually cave sanctuaries on mountainsides that people were taking votives of body parts quite often and leaving them for magical healing in this cave. And so to get into the sanctuary, you walk along the sacred way to the sanctuary. There's this great gate that you enter, the Propylia, and as you pass through that, you're then in the kind of precinct of the gods, the sacred precinct of Asclepius. And the surrounding the sacred precinct is a sacred grove, and it was illegal to cut down any trees from the sacred grove. You could be punished by death if you cut down any of these trees. Once you cross the threshold, you purify yourself with water from the sacred well and you wash yourself. So there's this, you wear white linen clothes to sort of symbolize you returning to babyhood, returning to purity. And that's supposed to sort of be similar to sort of swaddling clothes, basically. So you're purifying yourself. Then at the sanctuary, you would meet a member of the Therapeutai who would ask what your problem was, who would listen to you, tell them about your life, and try to work out, from your symptoms, what was wrong. And you would bathe in the healing springs of Asclepius, which is the sacred spring that emerges from Mount Kynortion, and it's why the shrine that predates the whole sanctuary was considered so important, because that's where the springs emerge. And they're cold water springs, mountain springs. So you drink this water, you'd bathe in this water. There are at least 4 separate bathing complexes at the Asclepia, like an ancient Greek bath, the baths of Asclepius, a Roman bath complex, and a military bath complex as well. And then you would be given things like a diet regimen. So it seems like everyone had a very holistic, personalized experience. And when you see the what are called the yamata, the descriptions of the cures, they're very detailed and very specific to each different person. So they will be instructed, for example, you would have massages as well. So massages were offered. And one of the descriptions talks about how you have to eat lettuce. The particular person had to eat lettuce, that to be rubbed with olive oil and dill. They had to do certain exercises. There's a gymnasium there, there's a running track there, there's a stadium for watching like sporting excellence as well, because that idea of inspiration and seeing like the perfect human being and being inspired as to how fit and healthy you could become would be useful. There'd be intellectual stimulation, so someone might read you a book, or you'll be instructed in some intellectual capacity. You would watch plays and you would cry or laugh or balance the humors, purge the emotions, because there is like a humoral approach taken to healing in ancient Greece. Hippocrates, who we all know was trained in the Asclepian of Kos, and then lots and lots of herbal knowledge was obviously understood. by the therapeutai working at the Asclepion. So you might be prescribed certain herbal concoctions, you would have massages, poultices applied, all sorts of things. The sacred serpents are there all the time, slithering around the various buildings of the Asclepia as well. The feeling that you get when you cross that threshold is that the Asclepia is this sacred precinct. It's like a divine, a carved out divine precinct that's separate somehow from mortal space and time. So there you kind of calibrate to your divine nature somehow. And so there are two really important buildings, or there's a lot of important buildings, but I would say the two most important specifically with regarding to sleeping and the cure are the what are called the Thymeli and the Enchymotarion. So the Enchymotarion is like a long dormitory building built on 2 levels where people went for their sacred sleep. And that's what enkymesis means, sacred sleep. And it refers to a sleep that happens in a particular place. And there are various descriptions of the experience that pilgrims had at the time, and these are collected in what are called the yamata. So they're like testimonies of pilgrims that entered into the Asclepia, had a healing encounter with Asclepius, or something happened to them in the Asclepian, and it was recorded on stele and erected in the Enchymotarion. And the descriptions are really interesting. So there are things like Asclepius came to me. I was having headaches for several years. Asclepius came to me in a dream. He cut off my head. He tipped out a load of bees and he sewed my head back on. So there are things like that that sound quite supernatural. And there are things like I came to the Asclepia. I was pregnant for 4 years. With Asclepius's aid in a dream, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy and he proceeded to wash and dress himself. So things that sound like, well, that doesn't sound very real. And then there are other things like a man describing what sounds like the priests of Asclepius operating upon him and him waking up mid-operation, perhaps where some anesthetic had worn off, being in pain and fighting to get off the operating table and them having to restrain him. So even things like this are recorded as well. And the priests were definitely utilizing placebo effect, like they were somehow incorporating that into their practices of, you know, there may have been things like priests and temple attendants becoming the gods and goddesses of the Asclepia when people are under the influence of opium and walking around draped in snakes and holding the staff. Like, it's very easy to see how under the influence of an opium fumigation, for example, or taking mandrake root bruised in wine, that you would start to make these visual associations. And when I did my my own like dream incubation exercise to try to have the experience of being in the Asclepia, one of the most notable things was that the serpents of the Asclepia were trained tame serpents. And that's actually quite an incredible thing to experience. So mostly serpents and snakes in the wild will avoid any kind of human contact and get away from you as quickly as they possibly can. Ancient people, obviously, even more so than us, primed to be fearful of snakes. And here are snakes that are trained and tame and come up to patients when they're lying in the Asclepia and slither all over them. And this is going to definitely be an unusual experience for people. And my experience when I had my dream was I was in the Enchymotarion and these serpents were coming up to me, and I had this amazing understanding and appreciation that these were the sacred serpents of Asclepius, and they're intelligent and they're curious about me, and they can sense things, they can smell things. And one of the things I wonder is whether these serpents have an incredibly developed sense of smell. They have what's called the Jacobson's organ in the palate of their mouths, where they can smell things very, very sensitively. It's the same organ that dogs have, and they're even more sensitive than dogs. So I wonder if serpents can smell disease and can smell wounds and things like this. So they may have been particularly curious about that. And for a patient to experience these tame snakes, smelling them and curiously and intelligently examining them, I think that would have been quite convincing for ancient people. So there is this idea as well in the Asclepia that in Greek mythology, Hypnos and Thanatos are brothers, they're twin brothers. So the god of sleep and the god of death are twin brothers. And I think that speaks volumes about the ancient conception of sleep and dreams, is that they are twins and they're basically existing in the same world. They're both the children of Nyx, the goddess of night, and they live in the same place in Hades. And one of the ideas in the Asclepia is that your sick self dies when it goes to the underworld in the Enchimiterion, and your healthy self is reborn. And so there is this, a bit like the Mysteries, this this waking up to the reality and this appreciation for life and this returning to your divine, God-given spiritual form somehow. So there was this absolutely really impressive, amazing menu of healing options open to people when they visited the Asclepia. I mean, it's exactly what people need to heal, is all of these things combined and working in unison and harmony and being presented, and just having the space and time to relax and heal as well. You know, most conditions actually, given the right environment, rectify themselves and heal themselves. But most
Even
of us are,
diet. I mean, there's so much research now. Just even diet alone could probably be responsible for like 80% of the chronic diseases that we're having. So imagine if you had diet, exercise, spa,
well, I
massage,
think a lot as well
sound.
about one of the, I have, like, touch wood, I haven't been to a hospital since I gave birth to my daughter. And I hate hospitals. I hate them. To me, they're like prisons. They just, you know, I can't think of anywhere worse to be. I think they are horrible. They have horrible lighting, horrible atmosphere. And everyone I know that ever goes to a hospital can never sleep. So how everybody knows and understands is so logical and scientific. This is why I have issues with science and the way science is demonstrated in our everyday aspects of culture. Is in a hospital where people are supposed to be recovering, very little is done to ensure that their patients have fantastic sleeping environments, which is probably the biggest, most important aspect of healing, is good quality sleep.
Every 3 hours, somebody's coming to take your temperature or poke you with a needle.
Yeah, or there's like horrible lights flickering, or you're, you know, I mean, people will talk about it's too expensive to do that, but I think actually there's an expense that needs to be made in the beginning to prevent much greater expense being spent later on. And I guess that's the problem with the whole of society, is there's no, we're not prepared to make a big expense at the beginning to reduce expense in the future.
Let me ask you, I have two more pinpointed questions which I've been burning to ask you. They have to do with, so now you've walked us through the pilgrimage to the Asclepion. We have a sense of the wonderful array of holistic modalities presented. Then there's the actual incubation, and under the sleep journey, there's at least, from my reading, at least two kinds of potential cure. One is more of a divination or a dream or a cryptic message, it seems. And then there's another variety which seems to be an absolute miracle, spontaneous healing, like a direct contact with Asclepius. Or
Yeah.
and so I want to talk about both. And in order to frame this properly, you did mention in passing, you mentioned placebo effect. Now, I think placebo effect is a really important, to get it really, to nail it to what it actually really is important in answering this question, because oftentimes placebo effect is just chalked up to be an ordinary mind, you know, what's possible for the ordinary mind, in a way that, for example, when they run experiments, they run the trial with the experimental trials run with the medicine and a placebo effect. And these are usually people that are not well primed. They don't have any experience. They don't have any, they're considered the control group. And so it's sort of unfair, because it's an unfair descriptor, because remember working in my early years in
in a residency at Harvard, there was a cardiologist we were working under called Dr. Herbert Benson, who wrote a book called The Relaxation Response, which was very, very well received. But his next book was called Remembered Wellness. And what he was trying to do, even early on in the early 90s, what he was trying to do was push back on the paradigm. He was basically suggesting that placebo is not, it's not random, it's the activation of the body's innate capacity to heal. And so I think that's wildly different from just having a uninitiated control group who is taking a sugar tablet to see what symptoms disappear or appear in contrast to an experiment group. If people are primed and they have faith and they have initiation, I think the placebo effect it has to be rebranded as something else, because that in itself, that is a wonderful, must be a very active ingredient in the healing, experience. I actually
Well,
want to say,
that's
it was just to add one more thing. I saw a quote yesterday, which it's synchronistic because it just fits right here. It said, the medicine is only as good as your belief in it. And so there's something about conviction or trust or confidence or faith, something that we bring to the experience. So I want to just ask you about placebo and remembered wellness, or whatever you might want to rebrand it, or faith healing, belief. I mean, this was a time where there wasn't an alternative. This is all they really had. And now we're working backwards because we've been so indoctrinated and institutionalized by reductionistic medicine to think that that's the bee's knees and that's all there is. And yet the veils are opening and the portals are opening, and we're revisiting these older ways, and we're seeing the limitations of our modern approach. What is it like for Westerners and modern people and developed country people to go back to these places? And what is the active ingredient inside of them that would serve as a catalyst for this kind of healing?
Well, I think that is an area where dreaming may prove to be very fruitful, because especially with regards to lucid dreaming, when you're in a lucid dream and something happens, like say, for example, you are given, here's a healing potion that's going to cure you from everything. And you're in a lucid dream, you're in this non-ordinary state of consciousness where your mind and body is so deeply entangled, where you feel like you're really there. You have self-awareness, it feels realer than real, and someone gives you something that will cure you of everything. And I think, I was talking before about how alcohol or some sort of substance acts as agents of transformation. I think when you take a medicine, or where something happens to you when you're in that lucid state, your body responds in this full, complete and complex way that it's very hard to replicate in an ordinary waking state. And that placebo effect probably is working in the unconscious and the subconscious more than it's working in the conscious anyway. So lucid dreaming is the perfect place to experiment with this. And we know that there are certain genes that are switched on when we're sleeping that aren't switched on during wakefulness. And those are genes that are very important for the processes of homeostasis. So they're the natural processes of self-healing, of cell repair, of detoxification, of all these kinds of things. If you combine that kind of foundational state of sleep with lucidity, with meeting a God that you hold in high esteem, that you adore, that bodily sensation of bliss and ecstasy, and there being a remedy, a physical operation that is performed upon you by this God in the lucid dream state that you're fully engaged and conscious of, but your body is asleep, then I think that's when actual magical things can happen, because you're in this completely unique state of consciousness. And it is a state of consciousness and a state of, nervous system like relax, and during that powerful phase of homeostasis where real change could happen, because you're experiencing this thing as if it's real and your body's acting sympathetically to it as well. So I think, you know, I often look at, like, say, for example, orgasms or wet dreams, a sort of similar kind of thing happening in response, especially if they're lucid, in response to like a sexual or erotic scene. Your body is responding as if it's really having sex, it's having an orgasm. So if that can happen, then I think that this can also happen. And maybe it happens more powerfully with you know, if you had your leg chopped off, I doubt your leg would grow back necessarily. But
Yeah.
but it depends. There's like levels of effectiveness. But I think that dreaming is a really safe and healthy way to practice these sorts of experiments, because I don't personally think lucid dreaming is dangerous to anyone. I think it can just help boost your health, your confidence and your mental state as well. So I think lucid dreaming is an avenue that needs to be studied more with regards to how healing effects can happen in lucidity.
It's worth going over it again because I think when you said it, it's actually really profound. It's very subtle. There's this idea in there somewhere that the state of mind, state of consciousness, has a role to play in the healing process. I think that it's worth slowing down, okay? Because here in Bali, for example, I work with an alchemist, you know, and the modality to the ordinary eye is like some sort of voodoo magic, right? It doesn't compute. You know, it is so far from the Western approach to the medical model. You know, it includes homeopathy, astrology, a long conversation. It includes intimacy. It includes touch. It includes kinesthesiology. It includes all these things. But ultimately, there is change or a shift in consciousness that needs to be activated. There's something from the client or from the patient's side that is an active ingredient in the healing, the unfolding of healing, which I think the Western industrialized reductionistic model thinks that the active ingredient is in the chemical substance itself. And everybody else is just passively, like, you just passively receive this thing and the chemistry changes. Whereas I think the models that you're talking about and some that are still available or extant in these, you know, indigenous cultural art forms of healing, the role or script is flipped. They're not also saying that the feathers and the rice that they sprinkle on you, or the, you know, the prayer or the mantra that's chanted, or the actual site. You know, here in Bali, these temples are on springs. You know, the temples for healing are associated with the spring. So it's not that all the outer accoutrement is irrelevant, but what it's saying is that there's a multimodal and interdependence between all of these active ingredients. Most of importantly is this alteration in consciousness that you're talking about, and something to do with faith or conviction, belief. And I have to say, it's making me jump forward into the conversation about deities and theurgy from the Tibetan yoga side, because I remember my teacher Geshe Tenzin Zopa taught us the medicine Buddha practice, which is actually the one that I want to teach or lead at the Asclepion in Pergamon. But here he said that, you know, faith, it's not just faith. There's this part in the visualization of the mandala generation of yourself generated view of yourself as a medicine Buddha, as a healing Buddha. What really needs to take place is that there has to be a activation of the mantra or the vibration inside of you that activates you. In other words, all the accoutrement of the visualization and the ritual and the setting up of the altar and all of that is like almost like a psychodrama prop that
Well,
allows you.
that's a really good point, because I guess it's healing is about telling a different story, isn't it? And we tell a story about illness, and initiation is about telling a story, becoming part of the story, and this idea of theurgy, that you become the god or goddess, is part of that healing process, that you become a person in a new story that is healed and has the power to heal themselves or to be healed by a god or a goddess. I was thinking when you were talking there about, how often our consciousness is altered by our belief in our stories, and how storied we are as creatures. Like, we tell stories, and we can change a story at any point in our life and become an unrecognizable person. But because generally speaking, our lives, involve more people than just ourselves, it's harder to do. But you do find this sometimes when you move to another country, when you meet a new partner, when you move to a new house, you become a different version of yourself because your environment's changed. So going to this healing, holy environment changes you, because you have been taken out of the environment that perhaps has made you sick in the first place. And you've gone to this holy place that is harmonious, to recalibrate to that holy, harmonious version of yourself. And then you can return back to your ordinary life and hopefully maintain some of those qualities. But yeah, I'm very interested in how these things track with Tibetan and Buddhist ideas of healing in particular. And the fact that you said that the healing temples are built over springs, I mean, that's one thing already that's exactly the same as all of the ancient Greek sleep temples, and healing temples are built with springs.
Sacred, yes. I mean, the spring is here, at least there was a religion prior to Hinduism here that was Agamatirtha, which is sacred water. They believed that all the waters were sacred, that actually Bali is a deity itself, and that the estuaries and the streams that flow from the mountains down to the oceans and the oceans back up is the kind of living deity's subtle body nervous system. And they tracked the most potent sites along the estuaries, just like they track in acupuncture the site where they're going to put a pin or a needle, and there they would build a temple. And when you consult a Balinese healer, they will, depending on your diagnosis, they'll take you to a special temple. It's not like you just go to the same one. You go to a special temple that's actually for your condition. Anyway, that's Bali. The idea, for a moment there, was just fascinated with the two kinds of experiences in the sleep incubation. One is visitation, that might be more spontaneous and almost like a miracle, like a profound,
Yeah,
a
I think so.
a profound faith healing. But the other one were more these kind of cryptic messages that then upon awakening would need to be deciphered. That's what I understood. Can you say a little bit more about those? And there it might be interesting to see if there's any, synergy with what Jung's dream analysis, if there's any correlation there between the traditions, much later traditions of psychoanalysis, dream analysis, particularly Jung's version of it.
Well, there is an idea among some ancient Greek doctors that the human body presents as a kind of landscape in dreams. And so the therapeutai that were trained in dream interpretation, they could interpret a dream, and often if there were certain landscape forms, they would know what part of the body was ailing. Like, someone might go to an Asclepian and not really know what's wrong with them, and these dreams may reveal what's wrong with them, because there was a way of interpreting certain like landforms, like mountains or rivers or deserts or whatever it may be. And dream interpretation is really interesting, because in the Mesopotamian and Egyptian culture of dream interpretation, they're looking a lot at wordplay and puns. And I find that really fascinating, because there's definitely this relationship with the development of language and dream symbolism and dream understanding. And the Greeks had this concept of, there are dreams that come through the gates of horn and gates that come through the gates of ivory. So there are truthful dreams and deceitful dreams, and they categorize dreams as well. Like we were talking about, those divine dreams where Asclepius or one of his family come to you and heal you spontaneously. There's no denying those dreams. Like you say, they're miraculous dreams that are faith healing dreams, that you walk out of that dream with vision when you were blind. That level of like instantaneous cure. And then there are other dreams that might seem like cryptic or confusing, and they have different elements in them that don't involve Asclepius performing any miracles. And then a dream interpreter could tell you what this dream is telling you about your own body, and therefore prescribe a course of action. And also, you know, the human body is innately wise. I think it knows what it needs, but sometimes our intellect and our mind is so separate from our body, or not connected to its innate knowing, that it's confused by dreams. So dream interpreters who are familiar with dream logic and dream thinking and dream signs and symbols, and familiar with thousands of people coming to them for many years telling them about their dreams of their body, probably did do a pretty good job of interpreting dreams in terms of what cures were necessary. And so some of these dreams, because obviously also in these days you should remember as well that people did have a lot more sort of folk knowledge of herbs and remedies. So they may well dream about a particular plant or something like this, for example, that the therapeuti could then use in their treatment. So there are these kinds of dreams. But there's also this idea of horn, dreams that come through the gates of horn and dreams that come through the gates of ivory. And this is something that relates to punning as well, because the reason why the gates of truth come through the gates of horn is because the ancient Greek word for horn is very similar to the ancient Greek word for truth. And ivory is very similar to the word for deceit. So there is this conception in the ancient world that goes back to ancient Anatolia, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, that dreams weren't they weren't endogenous. They were produced from outside, and they were sent to human beings. They were like, dreams were personified air spirits, and they could come upon you at night. So it's interesting how many reports there are in ancient Egyptian dream literature of what sound like sleep paralysis and night terrors. But you can kind of understand that when the concept of a bad dream was that it was this it had its own volition. It was an entity that came to you, and so people were rightly and understandably terrified of dreams. And they even made these little rearing cobras to deter dream spirits from entering into their body. And there's lots of descriptions of what sound like sleep paralysis in ancient Egypt as well. So there was this idea from very ancient times that having nightmares a lot could shorten your life. And it is known that if you have a lot of nightmares, generally speaking, there are issues with your mental health. There are issues with traumas that you haven't like fully integrated or understood. So that makes sense. And there may be health things coming up in nightmares as well that we're not fully consciously recognizing, because the body is very wise, I think, and it does know things, and it does present these things in dreams for you to make sense of. And so a dream interpreter, an ancient Greek Asclepian, could help you to make sense of that, and then prescribe a course of treatment to remedy whatever it was that the dream had revealed.
That leads me into the question about the connection between lucidity and healing. So, I mean, you've talked about it, but I want to give you another opportunity to go deeper into the connection or relationship. And your work is really specifically not in, it doesn't sound that maybe you do interpretations too, but it sounds like you're facilitating people's lucidity. And I wonder exactly the connection between lucidity. Is it a stroke of insight that people have that alleviates conditions, or do not deal necessarily with the health side? Is there a relationship in your work between lucidity and healing?
Oh, definitely. I think that this is how like the healing did happen in lucid dreams. And the reason why the Greeks were, and most ancient cultures were categorizing these dreams as being like those kind of cryptic dreams we talked about just then, the kind of dreams that are sort of nothingy, they're just replays of the day. And then these divine dreams that are undeniably interactions with divinity, like theurgic dreams almost, you might think of them in that sense, like where you're becoming divine. And one of the things that I think is really essential to lucid dreaming, and one of the reasons why I love it so much, is it gives you this unique experience of bliss in a dream state. It's an amazing physical sensation as well to have lucidity, and it's very tied into personal energy and life force and desire, I guess, as well, actually, because one of the best catalysts for lucidity can be like having a crush or desiring someone. And when you think about people incubating for dreams with particular gods and goddesses, and that they desire and adore these gods and goddesses, when they appeared, they're likely to have become lucid because the object of their affection and attention was standing there right before them. And you know, if you've ever had a dream with someone that you got a crush on, that your body kind of rises up and the energy increases, and that can be something that leads you to lucidity. So I do think that lucidity was probably part of the reason why these faith healing responses could happen in dreams, is because your body is in this unique primed state of mind, body, soul entanglement, where a dream event can have real effects in the body. So I do think that that was happening, definitely. And I
So
think
I guess
that bliss feeling.
I didn't maybe I didn't understand it. So now it's clear. You're saying that both the options, the spontaneous healing and the cryptic messages, it's assumed that both were under the condition of lucidity.
I don't think necessarily the cryptic messages were lucid,
Mm.
but there is this there is writing about how Mnemosyne, the goddess of divine remembrance and sense making, was invoked before you would incubate for a dream, and she's a really interesting goddess. So she's the mother of all of the muses. So in some ways you consider her to be the source of all inspiration in the world. She's the daughter of heaven and earth, so she's this product of the cosmos and the terrestrial, and she names all the things on earth, and she helps you make sense of things. And so I think she's invoked not just so that you remember your dream and can extract information from it, but so that you remember yourself in the dream and you can be fully conscious and present within the dream. And I think that that is really important. And I think Mnemosyne, if you think about the fact that she's the source of all inspiration in the world, that ecstatic, blissful epiphany that you have when you're lucid, when you realize you're in a dream, is the ultimate inspiration. So I don't think it's an accident that she's also the mother of all the muses in the world, because the greatest inspiration I ever have is realizing I'm in a dream and waking up to the reality of somehow existing in this imaginal creative space.
Mm. I mean, when you talk about the bliss, it does very much align with the dream yogas in the Tibetan tradition. Although I may have to just share a little bit about them because there may be very important differences too. The point of the dream yoga, it at least in the tradition of Naropa, where there's these 6 yogas, they're like a series of internal yogas, really. The first one is inner heat. Uh, the inner heat, you talked about Wim Hof. I mean, I think Wim Hof is doing some inner heat practices, but I'm not sure if they're being used in the same ways that the Indic tradition actually used them. I think he's tapped into something, Wim Hof, about the deep possibility of consciousness to galvanize the internal physiology to actually become like a driver in the driver's seat of the biology.
Yeah.
But the fact in the Tibetan tradition, what these inner heat does is it begins to unblock blockages in the subtle nervous system. So it releases all what we would now call all the traumas or the blockages or the obscurations. And what it also does then, it also gives access to the latent, they call them drops and winds and drops in the subtle nervous system, but they generate tremendous blissful states. And this is the first level practice in the higher practices. There's this idea that from the ecstatic state of mind, deep, profound realization is more accessible. So it's like creating the conditions internally for an awakening.
Mm.
So in other words,
releasing the blockages and stimulating great bliss gives the greatest opportunity or access to lucidity. And so the yogas proceed into the illusion body and then into the dream yoga, and from there into clear light, and from clear light into bardo work, and then from bardo work into the ejection of consciousness at the time of death. But they're all of them are trying to do is not just have lucidity because it's fun. Not that I'm suggesting that's what the Greeks were doing in terms it's not just for amusement or for self-aggrandizement or for the or like some sort of accomplishment. It's based on the idea that suffering is produced out of delusion. And in order to achieve liberation, you have to have a perceptual shift in which you have ultimate clarity. And they call this clarity a number of different names, including luminosity and the view of emptiness. It's basically a non-dual state. So they're saying that the non-dual state is innately healing because it's seeing reality clearly instead of through the veils of your delusion and your distortion. But in order to access that state, they build this scaffolding with great bliss. So there's something in what you're saying about, and I know Dionysus fits into this because I know Ian Baker last week was talking about the great ecstasy as a, if not, and among many other things, it's a great disruptor of our distorted perception. It takes us way out of the box, way out of our confined thinking. But there's something about bliss, a blissful ecstatic state, which is a more optimal way of entering into lucidity, and lucidity is just right there. It's the way to break the chains of delusion, because
Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
think that, yeah, the bliss and the ecstasy for me in dream states is you suddenly feel your place in the eternal cosmic tapestry for, and this is why people wake up from lucidity often, because they get so excited and it's so overwhelming. It's like a
it's too much.
tsunami of remembering. It's too much, so they wake up. And I do access something similar to that, I suppose, in meditation sometimes, where you're accessing timelessness. And as a kid, because I was really into lucid dreaming since I've been very, very small, and the two things that interested me most or made me so passionate about lucid dreaming was, I was sure it meant that you could transcend death and you could be conscious of your exit, like you say. And the other was that I wanted to be a film director and make films about dreams and actually have a machine that could record a dream so I could show people it. So it's interesting because this reminds me of something I'm really interested in with regards to healing, and why gods of prophecy are also gods of healing. Is prophecy, in terms of our ancient conception and true essential understanding of prophecy, is this unveiling, this revealing of the true nature of things. And that is healing. That's so healing, because people think that they're important and they're the point of reference for their entire life. And that is often the thing that makes people feel sick, because they don't feel that they're part of the whole unfolding, living, dying, resurrecting cycle of life, which we are actually all part of, this continuum of consciousness. And in a lucid dream, you have a direct experience of the fact that you are just part of this continuum of consciousness, and it doesn't, and it's total sublimation of like self or fear of your single existence. And that is very healing. And so for an instant in lucid dreaming, not all lucid dreams are the same, but in lucid dreams, I've had that experience of feeling my place realistically in the whole of space and time. And that's what gives me bliss and ecstasy, is like just being in cosmic time is amazing, healing. And also so you get the sense as well, is that because existing in that cosmic eternal time is timeless by its very nature, is that not that nothing matters, but there isn't anything to be afraid of, because we always are part of this continuum of consciousness and part of the tapestry of life. And but I guess it's a hard state to maintain throughout ordinary waking consciousness as well. So lucid dreaming is a good practice, and it's just a reminder. Like meditation is a reminder, a little everyday check-in with the fact that you're an eternal being.
Yes. That brings us right. That's very consistent with the 6 yogas, because you go up this ladder of these yogas, but they're all trying to bring what's called recognition or choice, lucidity into all these moments, into all these transitions. So, the illusion of your body, the second yoga has to do with, it's called the illusory body. It's priming and training your recognition or your perceptual ability to sense that this isn't a hard, static, fixed entity, actually. So you're constantly training your mind to hold the cognitive dissonance that it is at once material but also infinite. Or you have a soul, for example, even though it feels reified or concretized. And you progress along these yogas, and they're basically bringing lucidity into all these different states. So, and particularly the transitions. So, like the transition between waking and into meditation, or the transition between waking into sleep, or the transition, even there, they say, between sleep and deep sleep, where we usually don't register any more lucidity.
Yeah.
Bringing lucidity into that. And if you
Yeah,
can
that's
manage to
fascinating.
if you can manage to bring lucidity from sleep, from dream into deep sleep, the corollary is that you could bring lucidity from life into the bardo
Yeah.
between lives. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what they're trying to do, because once you get to the 5th yoga, you're talking about bardo practice. You're talking about really the great masters capable of maintaining high levels of lucidity during the dissolution stages of death, so that they can maintain awareness and become conscious selectors of their next avatar or iteration. So this is why I'm saying that it's like a scaffolding that allows you to, wherever you're going, whatever transition you're making in life or between life, be in sleep or between sleep, even in orgasm and between orgasm and the afterglow, all of these transition points are places to maintain lucidity, because lucidity is like a corollary with enlightenment. It's radical awakening.
Well, bliss is so interesting, isn't it, as part of that, because it makes so much sense as well in terms of having these experiences. That I know there's this idea of like dying well and dying happy and not being fearful. And it makes me think of like sleep paralysis. When a lot of people experience sleep paralysis, they're in this actually really good state for entering a lucid dream, but they'll get a little fear, and then that fear overpowers them, and to the point where sometimes they feel that fear actually pressing down on their chest. It's like so overwhelming. And you have the same in nightmare situations quite often, where the more scared you are of something in a dream, the more power it has, like the more energy you're giving it with your negative thoughts. And I've had experiences of bliss and ecstasy in dreams, and I've had like several dreams. I remember as a teenager when what was it called? Nightmare on Elm Street was like a big horror movie that was big at the time. And there was this idea that if you died in a dream, you would die in real life. And it was this kind of like urban myth kind of thing that everyone used to speak about. And I had loads of dreams where I was going to die and I'd be scared of dying. And a few years ago, actually, this is the dream that made me kind of just come to Greece and stop everything else. So I had a dream that I was being initiated into this pilgrimage and taken to this place, and I didn't know where it was, and a woman grabbed me by the shoulders and pushed me backwards, and she'd placed this like veil over my face, and she tapped out a circle with a cross in it, and then she pushed me backwards, and I knew that as I went backwards I was going to die. And I knew also that I'd been at this point many times before, but this time I was actually ready to die, and there was nothing else I wanted. I was like ready to totally surrender. Yeah. And so as she pushed me backwards, I fell into like the cosmos like a nebulae, and it was like passing through a film, and behind me was this kind of like cosmic soup, and I tasted it, and it was a taste, it was like this liquid taste on my tongue, just a tiny little sip, and it was the most ecstatic, blissful, fantastic, and I knew that
Elixir. That's elixir.
I had tasted death. I tasted it, and it was amazing, and I did not care. I was not fearful of death anymore. And then I came back, and everything made sense in Greece. And I came to Greece, and I remember I was like lying in the sea once, you know, when you're just like lying surrendered in the sea, and I was like, oh, this is where I was in the dream. This is like me, like completely surrendered and in Greece, and these various other components were there as well. But yeah, this dream was really meaningful. And I have died in dreams before, but I'd never had a taste of death like that. But it was like you say, an elixir.
That's how they describe ambrosia, right? I mean, to reach the deathless.
Mm, mm.
And that prompted your relocation to Greece.
Yeah. Because, you know, this is what I was saying to you. One of the things of my retreats is, you know, a lot of people come on the retreats and they're like, oh, you're not as serious as I thought it was going to be. And it's like, I think that everything should be like really playful and really fun, and trying to promote those ecstatic, blissful, genuinely ecstatic, blissful states, not empty, hand on heart, trying to look serious gestures, but genuine childish ecstasy, ridiculousness, and fun. They're the things for me that promote that extreme high bliss sensation. And what happens when you have it in real life is it's much easier to access in the dream, and then that helps you have these sorts of experiences in dreams.
It comes through, Sarah. I mean, you're just a delight. I mean, honestly, on all the devouring of your podcast, it comes through this playfulness, which is what I was trying to say before. Like the academic world wouldn't have suited you, would have trapped you.
No, I did try. I mean, I started a lecture club when I was living in Hastings, and I'm really geeky. I'm like really I'm quite actually into academia, and I love having friends. I've got loads of friends who are in academia, and have really long, deep conversations with them and stuff. And I love it. And I love like super geeky, intense, detail orientated conversation and talk. So I would invite all these academics to come to my house to give lectures. And, you know, at the time, I didn't have any money. I couldn't afford to go to university. I just had my daughter. And so I used to sneak into the University of Sussex and go to lectures about neuroscience. That was one of the things I was really interested in. So I snuck into a lecture by Anil Seth, who's just written this big book called Being You. I think it's like a bestseller now. And he was talking about the science of consciousness. And I was like, you know, it's all right going to these lectures, but it'd be easier if they just came and did it in my living room. So I started going up to all of them and was like, if I give you £100, will you come and give this talk in my living room? And they were like, yeah, sure. And academics are great because I used to be a gig promoter before that. And it's a lot harder to organize a band and to arrange backline than it is to get a single person to give a talk without any amplification. So literally no one has ever said no to me, I don't think, like to do an Explorers Club for 100 quid. I don't think anyone ever has. And so I realized I could do like a bespoke cherry picking of exactly who I wanted to talk. And, you know, if they don't live too far away. And then with COVID, even if they do live too far away, all these talks could go on Zoom, which was incredible. So I did like a sort of bespoke educating myself activity for several years. And then got to the point where, you know, because I did a whole Egyptology lecture series, and my main interest is always like dreams, altered states of consciousness, ancient culture and religion, philosophy, ancient perceptions of reality. Like these are the things that I'm really like, I've always loved. And it just became more clear and obvious what my path could be, because I've got these niche interests, but now I found a way of pursuing a career in that is absolutely all my niche interests, but that other people are really excited and interested in, and it's literally getting paid to go on adventures and incubate for dreams and secretary. I couldn't think of anything better to do, frankly.
No, I mean, James Hillman would have an absolute, like, you know, you'd be a case study for becoming the acorn, you know, or the acorn becoming the full expression of who you were meant to be. It took a lot of risks, I'm sure, and so now it's paying off. But let's head into the future now, because I think we started with going back into the past. Part of the zeitgeist is a movement to recollect or remember, some of these ancient traditions, the esoteric knowledges. The paradigm is shifting so that, basically we can go through a civilizational healing. I think that
Mm,
that's one way of understanding it. What's happening is laying the foundations. Like the paradigm has to be much more inclusive and holistic for us to heal collectively and civilizationally. So, your work, what you're doing in Greece with your, and also in Egypt, and what your friend there is doing with New Hermopolis, which is
yeah,
fantastic. I mean,
yeah,
these
Mervat's
are,
amazing.
and so, and my friend here, Chuckaday, I mean, there's a revival of sort of the mystery schools, I would say.
Yeah,
People are making attempts, and of course, there has to be innovations that make them relevant to today's mindset and where we're going. But there is a kind of, I sense there is a really wonderful burgeoning of new possibilities. You mentioned the psychedelic revolution. There are these mystery schools returning, returning to Egypt and Greece. Let's talk a little bit about what that looks like for you, what your hope is in the next 3, 4, 5 years, and particularly like, and just selfishly, I have to say, like when I was in Greece at Delphi, I really thought, oh, it'd be so powerful to do very, very potent meditations on the sacred
mm,
grounds there. But then I always found that the guides and the guards were whisking me off because they don't like you doing anything. It didn't seem like they like you doing anything that may be religious. But you seem
that's
to be getting
why.
away with. Have you actually slept the night
No, I haven't slept. We have like little naps in there. We don't sleep the night, but there are lots of places here where you could get away with sleeping the night, I think. Yeah, they are a bit the great thing about the Asclepion up the road though is it's it is on the tourist map, but the tourists just get dropped off to see the theatre because it's this fantastic example of ancient Greek engineering and architecture, seats 14,000 people. And then they don't really look at any of the other sanctuaries. So we can be in the Encomiterion on our own. And there are places within the site that no one goes to that are kind of a bit off-piste. So I take people there where we can do incubation practices and we won't be disturbed. But talking about the future, like I was just checking. So there's a quote that I really like by Buckminster Fuller, and I think it's sort of my view on things is if you want to change society or culture in some way, there's no point in fighting like old systems. You have to create something new that's an inspiration. And Buckminster Fuller has this quote of, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And I really love that because I think that I can see now how I could create an Asclepian retreat center in Epidavros and it would work and it would inspire people and it would really obviously demonstrate how holistic healing centers can still be effective and are still useful and actually can still provide therapeutic treatments for people. And they don't have to be elite, they don't have to be expensive. You can do them simply, but they'll still work. And I think this is kind of the problem with wellness is becoming a kind of elite
luxury. Yes.
luxury, which actually shouldn't be. Is something that should be accessible. Clean water, fresh fruits and vegetables, organic, simple, natural material things should be available for everyone because they are actually like plentiful and abundant on this earth. Like Greece is fantastically it's obvious in Greece that things grow and that plant life is abundant and the nature of nature is abundance actually, but because people are living in impoverished cities where there aren't many trees, there aren't many plants, that abundance isn't necessarily obvious. And we're going to the supermarket and buying like vegetables every single day when every single vegetable that we buy in a shop could grow 100,000 tomatoes or 100,000. That's the nature of nature. And it's so bizarre that we've become so separate from that. And I think it's chiefly because we've been extracted from land and we should still have this relationship with land, because if we did, I honestly think gardening is the most spiritually nourishing activity that anyone can ever do. It's like naturally meditative. You feel and you start to understand land and relationships. And like the other day I was working on my garden, I was just watering it, a little praying mantis jumped in my hair, and I realized that I feel when I'm gardening, when I'm looking after plants, when I'm watering plants and trimming plants, whatever it is I'm doing, that their spiritual energy, there's like, they all have spiritual energy. And so I never feel alone, because the plants have personalities and spirit, and you can feel their living nature. And it's so sad that people don't have gardens. I think, you know, my garden's literally like this size, but it gives me so much joy and is so enriching. And you see how you're creating life all the time. You're helping to nurture and encourage life all the time. And you recognize that buying fruits and vegetables from the supermarket is sort of ridiculous. Like, how could we have handed over that much power and responsibility to these organizations that don't even love and nurture plants? You know, loved and nurtured plants are much healthier for us, I imagine.
I've had a similar thought that actually the powers that be are afraid of alternatives because they are more
Yeah,
cost
definitely.
effective.
I'm just going
I
to
know.
move because I
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
plug my laptop into
Yeah, yeah. I was I was thinking of Chuckaday here. You know, Chuckaday's the alchemist who I've spent a lot of time with and wrote about him and our adventures in the book. But he used to take me out to his garden. I mean, it was out maybe an hour outside the city, and he was growing all kinds of medicinal herbs there. And, you know, here in Indonesia, you know, so his garden was situated above a spring, right? There's a temple there. He had a hearth. He would pick his medicinal herbs. He would make us teas and brews and tinctures. We'd have like a very modest meal, couldn't be more than 50 cents or $1 US for the meal there. And we were talking about natural medicine. I mean, his two, you know, 1-2 punch in the world is natural medicine and regenerative farming, and he says that they go hand in hand. And this is one of, you know, because Bali also has a lot of corruption it has to work through, and has a lot of pollution, and it also has a lot of industry, you know, the ramifications of the deluge of consumerist industry. But on the other hand, it has these very faint little saplings that are emerging that give me promise and hope for the future, because I do think like something like natural medicine is affordable. It's an ethos that is tied to the earth. Its medicine is ready available. Most folk traditions meant that people, ordinary people in the lay public society domain, would have had access to these kinds of medicines and these kinds of practices. They weren't just for the elite. They weren't just hidden behind a paywall. They weren't just for, you know, the special few that could go on a trip and access it. So there's something in what you're doing there on the ground, and you're actually living it. You're someone
I think
who,
it's definitely part of Greek culture. It's part of
mm,
modern Greek culture to have a little kitchen garden. It's still just completely normal. And all the
it's
Greek
true.
people I know in the village go and get their herbs from the wild all the time. That's an
And
everyday, ordinary thing. And
and even
so
in
it's,
Athens, on
oh
the roof
yeah,
and on your balcony, even if it's just
yeah,
one little
yeah.
plot, you'll grow something
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And I mean, things grow really well here. I mean, I've tried having allotments and gardens in England, and you know, I had a nice little garden for a while, but everything I put in the ground here just grows, and it's amazing. And I live in an orange grove, and there is like wild oregano and wild herbs on the mountain, and everywhere you look, there are actually medicinal herbs here everywhere. So I think that this is what makes working in Greece such an incredible pleasure, is that even modern Greek culture is quite sympathetic to this holistic, simple pleasures, simple way of life, simplicity, non-processed. Like I was thinking about this the other day, you go to a restaurant in Greece, very rarely will there be anything remotely processed on the menu. Like they're normally got a little plot where they grow their own tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers. They'll usually have somewhere where they've got olives. So their olive oil will be their own olive oil or someone family member's olive oil. that's huge, actually. You know, that's something that in England is kind of unthinkable now. Like, you'd have to go to some really fancy farm to table type place to get that in England, you know, and pay 100 quid a head or whatever. So it's incredible that Greece still has that, and they're really proud of it, and they wouldn't lose it because they're also quite I think Greek people are quite sensible. They realize that it's really good to still be a bit self-sufficient, and you never know when the systems are going to collapse, and you're going to need to be self-sufficient.
Well, the systems are definitely collapsing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just come full circle with our conversation and make a little aspiration that, after having the visitation of Asclepius and the synchronicity of eventually meeting you and your work, that I'd love to come and see you in Epidavros sometime. So
Oh, you'd be most welcome, Miles.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can make that happen, because and maybe even soon, because I'll be there. I'll be there in July. So we'll see.
Oh, you'll have to tell me your dates again, because my dates in Greece have changed a little bit, because I'm coming back on the 24th of June, and then I'm going to be here for probably the first week of July before I go back to the UK for a bit.
It's just been so lovely to meander in the dream world scape with you, and I love what you're doing. I love your energy. I love your message. I wish you all the best. I can't wait to meet you in person.
Likewise. Thank you, Miles.
And so everybody else on the line, thank you for joining. And those of you that are going to join asynchronistically, this is the conclusion of the live talks of discussions and dialogues on the Elixir Festival. I hope you've enjoyed the book. I hope you've enjoyed the lectures and the dialogues. I hope you've enjoyed all the guests and the portals that they've opened for us. And I will be dropping a last little bonus video next week, which is from Geshe Tenzin Zopa, my teacher up in the Sum Valley in the Himalayas of Nepal, who's building a stupa, which is meant to last 1,000 years. And we got his blessing and his vision for the building of that stupa. It's archetypal symbolism. I also was very privileged to offer the book up to the stupa, and Chokade was with me, the alchemist, who did a beautiful Balinese ceremony. So that's how we'll conclude the Elixir Festival. Just want to thank everybody for participating, and hope to see everyone soon on a journey, far or near, soon. And all best wishes.
This was very fascinating.